So, Mary Brown, Spectrum Health, and my role at Spectrum Health is focused on inclusion and diversity. But my background is in the sciences and particularly computer engineering. So, one of my first degrees was in computer engineering. I got out of it. So, I'm going to tell you the story behind that. Watch this not work. Okay. So, what I like to do is help you guys kind of like go on a journey with me to explore connectedness and look at how a lot of things in our world are connected and how our stories are connected to the work that we do. Now, for people who might be in the data science, that might sound a little fuzzy and touchy-feely. But I'm not being touchy-feely as much as I'm trying to show a reality of how we influence the work that we do and how that in turn influence whether or not we are coding or how we're coding, how we're looking at the data, whether it is from the marketing, journalism, or sociology, or psychology. I'll talk a little bit about that. So I've always looked at my world as being connected and being influenced by a lot of different things, people, places, and things. So as a little girl, back in the day when I was a cute little girl with those little Buster Brown shoes, I had two main influencers in my life. And the two main influencers were my mom and my dad. And my mom and dad they didn't get a chance to go through education like I did. In fact, my mom is from the rural South, or was from the rural South. They both have passed now. My dad was from Jamaica. And they only got through compulsory education at a certain point, and they had to drop out because a lot of factors around identity. If you know anything about the rural South in the U.S., how that was, so my mom's experience there, colonization in Jamaica, those sort of things, my father experienced that from a standpoint of the leftovers from that as he was growing up. He was 20 years older than my mother. So Papa he got a great game, evidently. He met her when she was 29. The thing is that they both were very, very intelligent people. I learned a lot from these two people. My mother was heavy into exploring what worked, much to my father's chagrin sometimes, because when he didn't finish things around the house, she would explore it. I remember as a young girl coming in, and she had often talked about wanting a wall removed. And coming in from school and walking into my bedroom, the room close to my bedroom, there's dust and everything. She had knocked down the wall. He didn't get to it fast enough. So sometimes with my partner, I get to that point too, and he's like, right, just do it myself. He comes outside and I'm under the tractor trying to change the blade. But very technically sound, she knew how to work tools and do all that kind of stuff, take things apart. And I learned that from her. That's how I learned how to take apart the thermostat and play with mercury. That was back in the day when we had mercury. My father also, his area, it's very technically sound, but his area was around health. He always wanted to be a doctor. And at his age, he served in World War II, which was interesting. And he was a medic, or he worked in the med unit. And he got his nurse's certificate. And I remember when he did something that I thought was miraculous with healing. He found a sty on my eye, and he took a little piece of bread and dipped it in milk and said, hold it there with a gauze. And it took out the infection. And I was, my mind was blown from that, because I didn't know the science behind that. And I remember saying to him, Dad, what? Why? How does that work? Why are you so interested? There's books all around the house about medicine. And he talked about his dream finally. And you know how kids are, why? He finally got to the point where he said, I went a lot of times to apply at hospitals. And the last time I went was the time that I decided not to pursue it. he was told that he had impeccable, the nurse looked up to him and said, you have impeccable credentials here, but we don't hire niggers in healthcare. As nurses, specifically what he said. And he said to me, never allow anyone to tell you what you can't do. And so that embedded to me. That's one connection in my or two connections really, in my web that have been embedded to me to understand why I have such interest in an array of things. Why did I absorb myself? And why did my parents indulge me with a lot of different stuff around that? And me and my brother. So I've studied music and all sorts of things, art. And I landed on technology and finally got the engineering degree. It was just associate. But when I going into my bachelor's, I walked into the classroom and I was only female in that classroom and only female color. There was nobody of color actually that bad, right? And I grew up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, by the way. So you can understand the segregation there. I said, I don't know if this is for me. Every answer I gave was not good enough, right? You all heard the stories. And that's not fallacy to the guys here. You might have even seen it happen. That's not fallacy. It happens a lot. And so all of this have led me to different ideas of thinking. To this point where I look at how the future, the past, the present, and the future connect. That's in the web. How I look at the ethics of AI. I remember building my first robot when I was in junior high. And oddly enough, being sheltered in sort of having a female instructor for a long time. That was unheard of in the 80s, in an inner city black school too. So I was gifted that by life, to have that, and be able to go into the things that are my passion. Now, ethics and post-semiology, which looks at the connection of technology and culture and how that works and how each one is symbiotic as far as how it connects and influences each other. So I'm going to use metaphors. How many of you have heard of broken windows policing? How many have heard of curb cuts? Okay, so those metaphors I'm going to use for the remainder to show and highlight how these things that I will say in the analog world, if I can layer metaphor on top of metaphor, right? In our analog world, are influencing and connecting to our digital space. And how those things are being replicated into society, right? So everybody familiar with broken windows policing? Can somebody tell me what that is? Let's get some participation. Yeah.
It's essentially a theory in criminology that states an individual's environment shapes their criminal tendencies, essentially. So obviously neighborhood with a lot of broken windows, maybe it's a high crime area. And the individuals that are growing up there will follow along that path.
Right. So it's a form of policing, right? It's a policing theory. If I follow the broken windows, the trash, the graffiti, then more than likely I'm going to find the criminal. Now, when you think about this, you can go back to the two gentlemen that came up with this. Keller, I believe, is one. I can't remember the other. I'm too busy holding this to stop to look at my notes. But he was interviewed in Atlantic Magazine a while back, and he was saying this was just a starting point. I never meant for broken windows to be taken to the next level. The next level is going into profiling communities, going into those communities and policing so hard that of course you're going to get the numbers that you want to see around criminality. So it begat into jaywalking, loitering, those sort of things, right? And so those arrest records happen, and you pull them into, now, in the digital space, data. And he said it was meant as a starting point for police to say, in these type of neighborhoods, we go in and we walk around and we build relationships. So the sociological piece to that, the psychological piece to that was taken away. I work often at GRCC, so I work at Spectrum Health, but I've been teaching at GRCC for 22 years now. And I teach in both the business and psychology departments. And so one of the things is that I meet a lot of students that are going to become police officers. And at one point in their career, they're going to the sociology classes and the psychology classes, but somehow that kind of drops off. They forget that part. And it might be the stress. I don't know what it is. But something is indicative that we miss the continuing how we connect, the connectedness that I talked about earlier, and how we connect in the wrong way. So, looking at crime and punishment, looking at predictive AI and how that works, and it's looking for those patterns, right? So think about how those patterns are replicated if I pull in data from an area that I've profiled, because I'm writing up people for infractions, and I'm arresting them for these minor infractions. So that data gets pulled into with even harder data. And so if I'm going to drill into a neighborhood, that pops up. I have some book recommendations at the end of the session, and in fact, I think we're doing a raffle off that you get to get those 2 books and $50 book credit for Schuler. But I encourage you to kind of research it even deeper, and how we need, in journalism, right, people to have a certain eye towards this. I'll get more into that. Sociology as well. So let's look at an example. This is Brescia Borden, who was 18. She had a theft of $80. And Vernon Prater, hopefully I didn't slaughter his name, 41. And he had a theft value at $86.35. Both of them did something bad. So let's dig deeper into the data. So if you look at how the algorithm program that was used for these two, it's going to predict the likelihood of individuals going back, the recidivism, right? Going back and creating a theft. And what it will do is give that person a point or rate them at some point. So let's see the ratings for these two. So Vernon had prior offenses, 2 armed robberies, 1 attempted armed robbery, and 1 grand theft. And he was rated in the system. And this is within the same county in Florida. So it's not across the United States. It's in one county where ProPublica did the research. He was rated at a risk of 3. Brescia was a risk for juvenile, none subsequent offenses, meaning didn't go back and do anything, was rated at a high risk of 8. Now, they stole about the same thing, right? You look at it, same amount. Brescia's story is that she's walking with her cousin, or she's walking with a friend, and she's going to pick up her cousin from school, and they see a bike and a scooter just kind of left there on the lawn. They get on it, take off with it. Neighbor yells at them. They drop it. They keep moving. Neighbor calls the police. Police gets them, misdemeanors, juvenile misdemeanor. Vernon, Home Depot, packed a few tools in a bag, tried to walk out, got caught. That's the value of that. So think about how that impacts both of these individuals. How do you think it impacts Vernon for a job? They might be hard on him.
Employers can't see this risk for sure.
Right.
But they can see the prior offenses record.
Mm-hmm. So he may not be watched as closely, but she's going to be watched. And, depending on where they live, neighborhood-wise and stuff, one might be watched more than the other. But that record, having worked with young people too, I was a high school principal years ago at GRPS, I know Berishas and how that record follows them. And I know how those records also follow women for other offenses and how hard. I have them in my classes now. So, when you look at data, it's very important to see how it's being used and how it's being interpreted.
So
Yeah.
One quick question. So I get the algorithm spits out these risks. How did the risks get used? Like, were they used for like sentencing? guidelines or something?
Further, so she may be further watched. So a lot of times what happens with these algorithms is that says that this person is high risk. So maybe she's out and she jaywalks. She gets stopped, right? Oh, that risk pops up. And this was used by police.
So
Police
like
particularly.
probation officers, police. Like, okay.
Yeah. So every little infraction, and trust me, I see this with students, happen to the students a lot. Poor white students, happens to them a lot. And so what we have to think about how the data impacts, how the data is interpreted. And so to go further into it, they looked at 10,000 arrest records in a Florida county, looked at recidivism. And one thing that was interesting, based upon race, if you were labeled high risk but didn't reoffend, it rated at 23.5 to 44.9. Okay, so about, parity, right? But low risk and did reoffend, look at what happened. So rated at lower risk, the amount that rated at lower risk, amount that rated at higher risk. Okay. So this is how we're using our data, or departments and stuff is using the data. Let's look on poverty. Sometimes you wonder if it's a war on poverty or if it's a war on those who are in poverty. Virginia, trying to remember her name here, Eubanks, talks about, she uses the phrase poor houses. So those of you who might be history, anybody ever heard of a poorhouse? Poorhouse back in the day, way in the day, I wasn't even alive. But back in the day, that if you were in poverty, you got put in a poorhouse. So you got framed in a certain way, right? Because they criminalized poverty. If you were in poverty, it must be your fault. You can't pay your bills, so therefore, you're essentially jailed. Okay? So one of the things is this is a leftover mentality of how we look at people who are impoverished. I remember when 2008 crash happened and what happened to some people who were impoverished, and how their whole social structure and community changed and may have even turned against them. And this was more across the spectrum of people that I was connected with who were white. It was really interesting to see that happen. People hounding them. I saw a woman hounded in the D&W parking lot because someone had saw her use an EBT card, but she got into a Volvo, a nice Volvo. Making an assumption that you're in poverty Why are you in that Volvo? You shouldn't be in that car. Now, if you know anything about debt, if you have a car like that and you have a lease, you're going to try to keep a hold of that, because you can't just walk away and not damage you even more. You can't just say, I'm poor here. And oftentimes you can't even put it on your Chapter 7. They just take it, and then the car company will sell that car at a lower rate and still put it on your credit report. So anybody who was at a certain level with whatever they had in investment and maybe a vehicle, it would have been smarter to try to pay that off. The other thing is that it's, you're often told as you're poor, sell this. I remember moving from when I first moved here from Grand Rapids, and my mom said, well, you're going to school, you're working 2 jobs, you should be able to afford food stamps. Maybe you might want to think of food, so you get food. Because she, unfortunately, she thought that I had lost too much weight. And I remember going to social service office, and the lady said, okay, I bought tools, because I'm new to this. I don't know what this is. They tell you list everything. I list everything. I'm being honest. I got tools, my calipers and oscilloscope and all that kind of stuff. And the lady said, we're going to have to sell all of this. I said, well, this is for me to go to school. I need this. Now you're going to have to sell this, and you're going to have to sell your car. Well, the car is paid for. I paid for this in high school. Nope, you got to sell all that. Then you can come back and we'll look at how much food stamps we'll give you. And I said, no thanks. I'll work a few more jobs. So there's not a day since high school do I not know working 2 jobs at least. It's such a habit now. My father used to joke with me that that's just part of my Jamaican DNA. I always wanted to work more than 1 job. And I said, well, maybe so. So we got to think about how we treat people who are in poverty. I went to a conference a couple weeks ago, Singularity University. Anybody familiar with Singularity? Okay. I hope to bring a group here in some sort of way to create a chapter. But, in Singularity, we look at exponential growth of technology. And what's really interesting with the work that they do out in Silicon Valley and San Francisco and Palo Alto is seeing all these people who are so great with tech. And then I started looking around me in San Francisco, and the poverty and the people on the street was just astounding to me. You've got people with 6 figures living in a 400 square foot house with 3 or 4 other people because they can't make it because of how the poverty is. You've got people on the street who are technologists that live on the street, rent a locker somewhere, put their equipment up, go shower, pay a monthly fee to shower at a Y or something. And I thought, man, I cannot even fathom that. And so they're moving out. And some of the latest data is a lot of them are looking here. I had a friend that actually moved just here, bought his house cash, $450,000. Very nice neighborhood. And it's cheaper for him to fly every other week out to San Francisco and live here than live there. But think about this. We are all connected. It's going to touch us all. Because once individuals, and I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not you can't move in my neighborhood. I'm not one of those people. But we have to start creating infrastructure now to deal with homelessness and the lack of housing and the lack of wage for young people, especially coming in. Because sometimes I'm disgusted about how much you all are paid to do stuff, and they give you a fancy title. I'm like, you're director of what? And they're giving you 30 what? It's ridiculous. But thinking about how we might be priced out because we're not looking ahead to these things. And I'm working with a group that's looking at future of AI in West Michigan. Women are impacted. You know, you have your Siri and your Alexa, Cortana. They all have these feminine voices. I was reading a study a few weeks ago of how even these voices, when people play around and they sexualize or make comments, how either Alexa responds in a way that's playful. She might be feminist in one way, but it'd be playful kind of speak. We replicate analog to digital world. Families. In poverty, connected back to poverty, how families are impacted too. Because one way families are impacted is that if I have sought out social services in some counties that use data analytics, it looks at the prediction of how stable my family are, because I'm doing things to help myself, but that analytics pulls in to look at stability of family. It also gives some sort of rating. So individuals are watching this way. So how do we take the biased mindsets from the analog to the digital? Think about curb cuts. Those who said they knew what curb cuts are, what are they? Yeah.
Being able to make handicapped accessible normal sidewalks.
Mm-hmm. So if you're familiar with universal design, actually curb cuts, the thought and work from curb cuts comes into universal design, even to how we design our interfaces has helped with students, right? Closed captioning has helped me, even though it's for somebody hard of hearing, when I'm kind of doing two things at once and I'm watching Netflix. I can look up, right? Or if I can't hear in a sports bar, I can see closed captioning. So the idea is that the things that I do for one group, especially one group with disabilities, actually might help the whole. And so how do we build curb cuts into what we do with our data? I want you to consider who is part of the coding too. Ask not only who am I coding for, but how are individuals experiencing bias? How are they experiencing bias? So if you're doing something for police department, how might this group be experiencing bias? And how can that possibly be replicated in what I'm doing in the digital world? Think about your own personal beliefs. Every experience I've had is connected somehow to the work I do. You can't help but influence that. So you always have to think about what are your biases. I'm always thinking about when I'm working on a project or doing something, what are my biases? And I literally take an index card or a piece in my notebook and I will list what I think my biases are as I'm embarking on doing this project. So it's front of mind. And then try to answer the deeper questions about the data use. When you're working with people, how is this data going to be used? What are you hoping to accomplish? Have you thought about this, right? And then a couple shout outs to IBM. I don't know, anybody familiar with this? This is new. You can go into the AI Fairness 360 and it helps you vet and check your data bias. So as you work in programs, you can actually check it. It does have data sets in there where you can go in and play around and look at how it works. And this came out like last week or maybe even a few days ago. So it's important. Also, Deloitte has an interesting program where they marry human with data, right? So I got to see that in San Francisco. Very interesting how you crowdsource the information with humans. So they took a scan, MRI brain scan, and had the computer diagnose it. Then they crowdsourced with doctors from all over. And you can actually see how the decisions are being made. It's really cool. And the doctors were actually more right than the AI. But the AI kind of located stuff. So it's really interesting stuff. So check that out. So we have to have a present view Be grounded in the present, but look at how the past and future works. Think about future mindsets. How do you marry being human with machine? There's a great book called Human Plus Machine, actually. If you're a data scientist, thinking about how sociology and psychology, or I should have said sociology, I said sociologist, anthropology. So how do you do that ethnographic work around that? And always think about high tech and high touch. So I leave you with these recommendations. Weapons of mass destruction, ultimating inequality. Those 2 books are in the packet that we're giving away with another $50 credit. And then Algorithms of the Oppressed, one of the newer books, really interesting, that digs deep into how our search engines work, particularly with women, minority, poor, and how we need to hold companies like Google and Facebook accountable for that. Any questions for me? Yes.
Without, obviously, your current employer, is there anything you can say, what's the most sensitive thing that Spectrum's grappling with in this field that you're talking about? Where do you feel like the biggest opportunity for progress or distinctiveness on Spectrum Health?
Well, I talked about that web, right? That interconnection. And one of the things is that population health is a huge thing right now. Throughout the system. We have signed on to the 123 Equity Pledge that is a few thousand hospital systems across the nation that have decided that they're going to make sure they look at equity in very different areas. What's a few hundred, I should say, I said 1,000. But what's interesting about that is we have to look and drill down into the data into our neighborhoods. So we look at how how people not having good nutrition impacts their health. How people going to the emergency room impacts the health. Where do we allocate people? One of the big things that was a big blowout was about allocate how we move nurses from urgent care recently, right? But the thing is that you have a PA and you have a physician there. The nurses are needed in high volume, high sensitive areas, like more important areas, I would say. Not that PAs and MAs aren't, but it's when you have that level of expertise concentrated in one area, but meanwhile, at your hospital systems, you need that expertise and it's lacking. So that's something that, probably the news didn't talk about. They didn't dig there. It was just sensationalized, right? They're pulling all the nurses. But, when you dig deep into that, you understand why those RNs are being pulled. And it's about 6 to maybe 12, I don't know. Any other questions? Does that help? Yeah, population health, I would say. Yes?
I thought the IBM Fairness 360 thing sounded really cool. Are you familiar with, are there any other things like that?
The Deloitte, and this is one of the first tools. I know that, you hear Google has an effort out there. I can't remember the name of it. I should have put my email address up there. But you can find me at Mary.Brown2. There's 2 of us in the whole world of Spectrum at spectrumhealth.org. And so if you have questions, I can send what I know from the conference and stuff like that to you. Well, thank you. And then I think we got our folks here. Are you here for your presentation? No, you just chilling? He's like, yeah. Refreshment break. Well, go get your refreshments. I'll be here for a little bit. Yep, thank you. Thank you so much.